Coming in from Waiki Benda, you just listened to Muna Kampala playing for you right here on 88.2 Sanyu FM. I am Crystal, it is the Hit Selector, and I'd like to welcome my guest today, looking absolutely fabulous, can I say? My goodness.
You look better.
Oh, thank you.
You look better.
Captain Mike Mukula is here with me today, although you said you're just Mike.
Just Mike. Mike will do.
Just Mike will do.
Mike will do.
Welcome to Celeb Select.
It's my pleasure, and it's a pleasure being on Sanyu FM.
Oh, it's a pleasure
the
to
first
have
radio
you.
in Uganda.
Oh, the very
first
first
FM station in Uganda.
Yes, still
Yes.
doing our thing, trying to make you proud.
They lead and the rest follow.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Aha, tell them. So, I was reading that your names are actually George Michael Mukula.
Right.
Were you called George growing up? Or
I was called Mike growing up.
Mike?
Yes.
Was it because you were named after an uncle? How did that happen? How come they didn't call
It was my mother, really. I think she liked the name Mike or Michael.
Michael?
But I loved being Pan-Africanist and being a man who loves the African names Ubuntu. I said Mukula will do.
Mukula.
Yes. But most of the time people come in and say Mike. So I find it easier.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. You're kitted out right now in like a really bright, like a luminous green shirt. You have the matching sneakers. Style for you is very much a thing that we know. Have you always been stylish, even when you were young?
I like to be trendy. Yes.
Okay.
Trend is real. I mean, it's important that you live your life and let live. It's good to enjoy your life. Nobody will love you better than you.
Okay.
That you need to know, and the listeners need to know. Because you live once, you don't live twice. And it's better always to try as much as possible to keep up with the pace of the world. And to try as much as possible to be on point.
Okay. You mentioned your mom is the one who used to call you Michael. Could
Right,
you
the
tell
late.
us- yeah. Sorry about that. For your loss. What were your parents doing growing up?
My mother was a teacher. She passed on last year, late last year. And my father was a pharmacist.
A pharmacist.
A pharmacist, yes.
Okay.
But I think my growth was driven by my mother.
Okay.
She was a very strong disciplinarian, very clean woman, meticulously clean. And she was organized. You know how teachers are. She wanted things to be done in a certain way. And she didn't want us to be lazy. And so I learned to be clean. I learned to be smart. I learned to wash my clothes myself, iron them myself. I was taken to school very early, an early age in a boarding school.
Okay.
And it was a difficult time.
Was that right from P1? You went to boarding school?
I went to boarding school, I think about primary 4. Yeah, primary 3, primary 4.
Okay.
And it was a difficult time. You know, you're young and you're not used to early morning chores, waking up to clean the compound, slash the grass, clean the classrooms. And to me, there's a time I used to be naughty a little bit.
I'm not surprised.
Climb up the tree with my blanket and take a snooze up there. I wanted to catch up. I love my early morning sleep.
You would climb up a tree
Yes.
to get a nap.
The mango tree to get a nap.
Okay.
You know.
Okay. Where did
Difficult time.
Okay.
Sorority Church of Uganda.
Sorority Church of Uganda.
Yes.
That's where you went, huh?
Yes.
Okay. And what about your siblings?
My siblings were, to a large extent, looked after well. For me, I think I had the most difficult time. First of all, I grew up out of a separation. My mother and my father separated when we were still young.
Okay.
I used to be woken up in the middle of the night, 3 a.m., when you're in deep slumber, deep sleep. and you hear a mother crying, and domestic violence,
Oh.
and then you're woken up to walk in the middle of the night to a place you don't know, and you are really half asleep. You stagger and you're carrying things. That's the kind of growth I had. So my mother had to look after us when we were still young. She had a salary of a teacher, which is not enough. Even now, I admire teachers. But the point was that as I was growing up, there's a time when we moved up to our uncle's home, because he left the home and went to live in the village in order to let his sister be close and let us go to school.
Okay.
But there are times, say 6 o'clock or in the evening, she would come and there's no food, and she looked at us, and she would break down into tears because there's no food for us to eat. I would tap her in the back and say, "It's okay. If we don't eat tonight, the Lord will provide. We'll eat tomorrow." And that was the difficult time in my growth. Sometimes we'd go to bed with only sweet bananas. It was a difficult time.
It was a tough time, yes.
And then at one point she was transferred to a place called Kabiramaido, where she had to teach. And she moved out with my young sisters and so on and so forth. I lived with my uncle in Soroti town. He was a medical assistant. And he had a girlfriend in Moroto. Very difficult, because you leave me at home for almost a month. No food.
How old were you at that time?
I was young, about 10 years.
Oh.
And, in primary. And I would wander in town. One time I walked without food for 3 days, almost 3 days. And I walked into a bar, and I remember the place called, which was in town, Kef Amigos then. And I saw it was called Shamlik's Kef. And I saw my two uncles having a beer at the counter. And I walked down to them and broke down into tears. So my uncle said, "Why are you crying?" I said, "I've not eaten for 3 days, uncle." So he put me on the side table and bought me 2 sumbusas and a bottle of Fanta orange. I have never forgotten that up to date, because he really saved my life. But the point is that when he died, I gave him a king's burial because of the 2 sumbusas and the Fanta.
Because he really
Yes.
came through at that time.
He really came to me, and at that time I was a minister. And I was in Arusha when I got to know of his demise. And I made sure that he was given the best burial ever I could at that time.
Okay.
Yes. So children don't forget.
No.
Children never forget. And when a child comes to you when he's 8, 9, 10, 11, remember that they never forget.
Okay.
It's a critical point. Children and old men, when they come to you, they are not out to play. They're not out for games. Their narrative is correct and accurate.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Those are really tough times.
Yes.
But you managed to stay in school
I
despite
managed to stay
all
in
that?
school. I went to Soroti Church of Uganda. Now it's called Soroti Demonstration School. Then I came to Kololo Senior Secondary. Then later on I went to Teso College. But at one point, I used to live with my uncle, Jonathan Ekochu, who was then in government. He was principal private secretary to the president. And one thing that I did was I used to see pilots. That time, British Airways, pilots of Alitalia, pilots of various airlines, Air France, and the East African Airways. I remember your father.
Yes.
And he was a great pilot, Captain Newman, a household name. And I said, wow, we used to go to the airport and watch the crew coming in with dark glasses, navy blue suits, some were dark, with the golden bars, and the air hostesses looking smart, trendy. And I said, when I grow up, I want to be a pilot too.
So you decided when you were young, I want to be
When
a
I was
pilot.
young, because in Entebbe, we used to watch those guys come out. They used to leave, go to Lake Vic Hotel. At one point, we also had the Israeli pilots who used to fly the Air Force planes. At the time, they had what they call the Fugan jet fighters, the Israeli. And I said, wow, this is what I want to do.
Wow.
And I lived my dream.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. We're going to get back to that in just a bit. But we want to know the kind of music that you like.
You see, the music is trendy. It is, first of all, it is African. It's the beat. You notice that the African music is dominating the global world.
Yes. It is a hit selector on 88.2 Sanyu FM, and I am Crystal, chatting with Mike right now. You know him as Captain Mike Mukula. Now, you were talking about how growing up you went through a really rough time when your parents separated, and then at some point you went to stay with your father.
Yes.
How old were you then?
I was now a teenager, the early teenage ages, about 14 years. And
That was in Kampala.
in
then?
Kampala. He was now in Mulago,
Okay.
the main referral hospital, the national hospital.
Yes.
And he was staying in Upper Mulago. He had the quarters in Upper Mulago. But most of the time, we ended up staying with his second wife in the ghetto of Mulago. I mean, the real ghetto. It's now beautiful. It's a different place. But that time, it was caked with dust. And if it rained, no car would pass there. I mean, in the middle of Mulago ghetto. I mean, I ended up getting even jiggers. Jiggers.
I'm sorry.
Boys growing up is not easy. At one point, I mean, the whole place was full of drunkards. My father used to drink, heavy drinking.
Okay.
May his soul rest in eternal peace. But I'll tell you one thing. My stepbrothers, who were older than me, Kamia and Kagwa, the mother was a Mutoro, but their father was a Muganda. And so when we were in this place, they were big boys, and they brought munanasi. This is pineapple, more like pineapple wine. Sweet, very sweet. So they gave it to me. We drank, I think, a bottle. They were giving it to me in a glass, then another glass. They had music on the side. You know how teenagers are. And then at one point, they brought weed, you know, weed. And they gave me to smoke and cigarette.
This is all in the same time?
Same time. That was murder. I'll tell you one thing. I got so high, and I think walking up to Upper Mulago, where I was staying, apart from sometimes staying this side, I fell like 1,000 times. I was a mess. I was looking terrible, all caked up with mud, and I had a hangover for almost 3-4 days. I was sick. That was my last time to taste alcohol.
So that is why you don't drink.
I don't drink alcohol. I don't smoke. I abide by all what you call the rules that drive an upright man. It was a difficult time because, I mean, we used to fight all the time. I don't fight. I used to see the boys fighting. So really, to grow up for young people in the urban centers is a very difficult time.
It's challenging.
It's very challenging. And, you know, you have got to go to school. At that time, as I said, I was a student in Kololo Senior Secondary School. I do remember when I came into Kampala to look for a job after I finished my A-level. Difficult time. And
So how did you manage to get to flight school in Nairobi then?
I had This Haji Nasa Sebagala is an icon. I respect him tremendously. He had a wife who died. She was a white lady. She was called Elaine and Sebagala. She died in an accident on a little after Mabira Forest as you were climbing towards Jinja. I think she was overtaking in a blind corner and they had a head-on with another vehicle. She died instantly there. But that lady offered to pay the fees for me. And she's the one who took very good care of me and paid for my flight training in Nairobi. And later on, we had support from government. There was then the permanent secretary, the late Kitariko. And also there was another permanent secretary. They supported my training in the United States.
Okay.
So it was a difficult time. I didn't have the money, obviously, but my ambition and humility is a virtue. I think being a young man who was humble and willing to listen, listening to explain myself to the people. And that's why I have tried my best to listen and help many people. So in all my growth, I got that support. And when I came back, the late Museo Guli gave me my first job in my life as a pilot and an instructor in Sorority Flying School.
Okay.
And I was among the very few Ugandans who had qualified then as a flight instructor. And, to teach somebody how to fly a plane is not an easy thing. I remember one time I had students. Two of them were from Air Force, and they were all given to me. And they were very experienced pilots. They used to fly the MiG-21s.
Okay.
I think during Idi Amin's time. So when they were brought to get them into the civil licenses from the military, I remember I had one watchman in the school. He was from Teso.
Okay.
So he said, I have been looking after these aeroplanes for almost 12 years, and I've never tested. I've never been into one of them. But you are one of us. You are from Teso. Why don't you put me in the back? And I also go and see what they look like.
I also go up there.
Let me go and see what it's like. I said, but I'm going to do a training which is more like aerobatics. We're going to be turning this plane up and down. He said, no, don't worry. I'll be quiet. I'll be quiet.
Okay.
So I looked at him and I said, okay, jump in the back. So I had the student in front. We took off. We climbed up. We're about 9,000 feet above sea level. We did the usual checks, no loose objects, all instruments green, a good airspeed. There is no aircraft approaching from any side. We did 360 degrees check and so on and so forth. The normal routine checks. Then we reduced the power to 1,000, about 1,200 RPM. Then you pull the nose up and allow the plane almost to stall. Then you kick the radar and the aeroplane will do the aerobatics.
Okay.
It will turn up. One moment your legs are up, another moment your head is facing down, and so on. This guy screamed like a train. My goodness.
But you have to understand where he's coming
He
from.
screamed like a train. Even a whistle is nothing. He was shouting from the back, take me back home, take me back home. I have had enough. I kept quiet. I said, we have just started. He said, no, I want to go back home. So here we go again. We climb up. After we recovered, we climbed up 9,000 feet. And he said, don't do it again. Don't do that again. So I kicked the rudder and we went into this loop, somersaults. And I want to tell you, the screaming behind was deafening. I'm very sure that the people who were down were listening to a man who was out of his mind now.
He thought he was going to die.
He thought he was going to die, really. When I looked behind, His eyes were red,
Oh.
like a red flag. And I saw this guy is going to die in the plane.
So you
Let me
ended up
take him
like,
back.
okay. But now I'm going to ask you for your next request, which is a Flavor Loose Guard. Here it is.
African music has got heavy beat, the bass.
You always feel it. It makes you move.
You always feel it, and
See them haters, all of them don't they damn wanna. If you be soup, oh, I go chop for you like a bantu. As someone be a return to my love, oh, killing me softly.
You talked about your passion for flying and being a pilot. And then you also talked about the challenge of, coming from a broken home with your mother struggling
Poor
to
mother,
get you,
very poor
to
mother.
get you through school.
I remember when I was in Teso College Aloit, one of the best schools in Teso, and I think it was second term in my second year, and I left Soroti, I'd left Kololo, and I was being expelled because I was being sent out of school, not expelled, being sent out of school because my mother could not pay school fees. She couldn't afford. It was a difficult time.
Okay.
And I know many young people have these challenges of being seated at home, no school fees, the mother can't manage or the father can't manage. One of them is sick or the other, a broken home. So here I am growing up out of a broken home. And the headmaster then said, no, take him out of the school. You can't afford. It will strain you. And my mother pleaded with him. Next thing before I knew, she was on her knees and she was crying uncontrollably and begging the headmaster with her two hands together, praying to him to let me stay. And then she said, but now how am I, even if I let him stay, this is a government school, how are you going to pay? She said, let me go and sell whatever I can. And she said later on, I'm going to sell my only asset, the bicycle.
So you could stay in school.
It's a lady's bicycle. It was a sports one. And she went and sold that and came and paid for my school. And I stayed then in Teso College.
Okay.
And that's how she really had to struggle. At one point, we had to sell, she was selling alcohol, the local brew in Ateso called Lajono. She would sell Waraji. At one point, when I was much younger then, I used to sell mandazi, sumbusa in Soroti Bus Park and in town. One time, I think I ate some sumbusas and I was hungry. So she said, why? Why did you do that? And she really scolded me. She was on my case, gave me kiboko. Never say, never eat. That was a word, literally saying, never eat your working capital.
Okay.
And it taught me business. And when I came to Kampala, I used to live with my sister. She's now the late. She's departed. And she was living in a Muzigo. To live in a Muzigo, it's not a simple thing. I see many young people come out of university, come out of school, drop out, struggling without jobs. I walked to many people's offices looking for jobs. I want to tell you, Crystal, I walked to literally everybody I knew. Nobody was willing to give me a job. And another person told me, I don't have a job for you, and I don't have jobs for you. Go away and don't come back again. Well, I lived with this man, and my schoolmate was older than me. Was staying with my sister in Mzigo, separated with a curtain. And whatever they would do in the night, I would hear. But, of course, a small room, I had to survive.
Yes.
One pair of trousers, one pair of shoes, one pair of socks. I had maybe 2-3 shirts. Difficult time.
When someone looks at your life now, I mean, it's hard to imagine that you started that way. And you said those tough times are the ones that taught you business. How did you get into business when you were older?
In town here, I now became streetwise. I became streetwise, associating with boys, the Baganda boys, the Muslim boys, who were good in business, who knew what it was. And it was all about difference. And you sell these and get commission, or sell these and get commissions. Like people are trying to hustle. Basically, it was hustling. And when I came back even when I went to the US and came back after training, my first thing was, my first car was a Toyota. I bought it. I sent money from the savings I made in school and working. I used to work in the United States, 2 jobs. I used to work in Kinney Shoes. Then I used to work in an ice cream parlor and so go to school. So when you're growing up, there is no job which is odd. Do everything you can to survive. That's my message to the listeners, to the young people. There is no job you can't do. So I used to have these two jobs and also go to school. So as I grew up, I learned that the savings I had, I sent for a car in Japan, these refurbished cars. So when they sent this car, here at that time there was a demand, and I sold that car and bought 4 more.
What?
I bought that car, I sold it, and bought 4 more. The difference.
What?
Because it was a sports car. So when I bought that car, then I bought those cars, I bought more cars, and I got into car business. So it was that gave me the start. And I made the savings. From that saving, now I went on and on and on. And I now opened up Bimbo ice cream. Bimbo ice cream, I used to sell sambosas and sell mandazis. What I used to do.
And it was the only place to have ice
The
cream.
only place with ice cream. I used to bring that ice cream from Nairobi. I brought ice cream machines, bought them again from Nairobi. And I made money. So when I made that money, then I had a Chinese friend, Mr. Chan, and we opened up jointly 50-50, a Chinese restaurant called the China Palace, a national insurance building. The first 6 months, we made almost $390,000 because it was the only Chinese restaurant in town.
Whoa.
This lady of Fang Fang, she's called Fang Ming.
Yes.
She was working for me. She was one of the hostesses. And she up to now, she calls me her brother, a lot of respect. And even Mr. Lu, who now is in near Mukono, that Chinese...
Your next song, Baby Cool.
Baby Cool. Baby Cool is a good friend of mine. He has worked hard. He has told me his story, the struggle from nowhere.
This song I wrote it for you if you are 18 and over. 18 and over.
We were just about to get into how you got into politics, but then you mentioned one thing when we were off air, that your wife Gladys has a crazy fear of flying, yet she ended up with a pilot.
Yes.
How did you meet?
Gladys was going to school. My wife was going to school in UK. She was doing hairdressing. It was trendy then to have nice hair. Now they're the ones who pioneered get it done here. And I was in school in the US. And
You in the US, she was in the UK.
in the UK. And whenever we came back, we would meet. You know, there is always an admiration for people here when they come from UK or from the US. You dress well, you have good clothes, you look well, you smell well, you have the cologne, they have the perfume, and you have the bling bling. And so that's how we got hooked up. And but when I was in school, when I was in flying school as an instructor, we're then dating. So one time, I've said this once, I think, we came in and picked her. We were flying a Cessna 310, twin engine.
Yes.
Oh, my wife. She's the biggest coward in East and Central Africa. She fears airplanes like nobody's business.
Oh, no.
You know, it was rainy season. There are clouds. The cloud base is there. So I'm told, as they were flying, the student kept dodging the clouds. At one point, she couldn't because there were too many now, numerous.
Oh my.
And since they're light, she just go through them. And when you're going through clouds, because of the speed and relative motion, what you call relative motion, it's like you're crashing.
Oh.
You're crashing into a big hill, but it's a cloud.
Okay.
That's what they call relative motion.
Oh my
So
goodness.
she would scream. Then she told the student, "Totomera vire." Bikora bubi totomera vire. So don't knock the clouds.
Yeah.
And she kept going, and every time you have these downdrafts, ups and downs, up and down, then she would go, ooh, ooh. So every time the airplane goes up, she's, ooh. So the student started mimicking her.
Oh no.
And also kept, every time she said, ooh, the student would also say, ooh. So she told the student, "Ebyendulu bindekere, gwevuga ennyonyi."
I'm sorry. Unfortunately, we don't have so much time, but I wanted to ask, how long have you been married now?
Oh, we've been married for a long time. And we're going to be buddies for until the Lord do part.
Because marriage is not easy, eh?
It's not easy. But
Yes.
I want to say that we've been together. Of course, marriage is not a walk in the park. It's not a bed of roses.
Yes.
We have had our ups and downs. But I must say that we are happily married. We are. It's a very exciting time. And to see that we have worked the way we are. In actual fact, just to tell you before you switch on to the other side, in when I was just before 1996, the elections,
Yes.
I was very young, flying. I had the aircrafts because I joined Parliament in 1996 when I had 6 aeroplanes. Most people didn't know. They look at me. They thought, well, but I have worked very hard.
Yes.
When we missed a crash in Kidepo with President Museveni, is when I realized that this man has a lot of commitment to the country. Actually, that's the time I said, let me join politics and help my people.
Okay.
I didn't join politics to make money because I had the money and I have the capacity to make money. I have the means to make money. I have the brain to make money. But I joined politics in 1996 and I won overwhelmingly. And I've been in politics then. And I stepped out because I felt I had served, I'd done my part, and still strong, I wanted to come back and do business. I'm one of the few political leaders who have stepped aside voluntarily.
Exactly, because you made that choice.
My life history, when I put it into a book, will be able to tell many young people, many young girls and boys, that in order to get to where you are, you might need to work hard, and at a certain stage, you need to work smart.
Just your thoughts on some recent events that happened in Parliament. One of the questions put to me on Twitter was to ask you, as a former member of Parliament, what you think about the recent happenings.
No, I think that it's very unfortunate, it's regrettable. I think dialogue is the biggest thing. I would encourage at all times the country to engage in positive dialogue. There shouldn't be any point where we get into physical engagement. Most battles are fought in the brain and determined in the brain or in the mind. At this stage, I've never known confrontation to have solved any problem.
Physical confrontation.
Physical confrontation. It is that dialogue, that engagement. I have lived my life engaging positively.
Okay.
And the country is stable. To me, the country is stable. That is a very important thing. And if, for example, when you look at the opportunities for young people, 68% of that parliament is below the age of 35. 50% of the population is below the age of 15. 74% of the population or thereabouts is below the age of 30. the biggest challenge we have is unemployment. But the country from the north to south, west to east is very stable. And so long as Uganda remains stable, the region will remain stable. If you make Uganda unstable, the whole entire region, which depends on Uganda's stability, like South Sudan, will explode. We have 2 million refugees in the northern part of the country from South Sudan
Yes.
as a result of confrontation, failure to engage in positive dialogue. You have many refugees coming in from the DRC, from Burundi, as a result of confrontation. You have many Somalis who are here as a result of confrontation. Let's not export Ugandans out of the country. So my view is that dialogue will solve the problems.
Okay.
And
okay.
I'll try as much as I can, if they do, to engage the other side of the divide to see how we can come together and forge a common drive.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining me on the show today, for sharing part of your story. We're looking forward to that book.
It is a pleasure. That book, my goodness.
From just the
It's a
little
must
you've
read.
told us today.
It's a must read.
Yes. And thank you again for joining us on Celeb Select. And I'll ask you now for your last song. You said this is a very special song to you. Kofi Olomide.
Kofi Olomide is a great musician. You know, the Congolese are the ones that have introduced music here. The first musician who was brought and who motivated many of the Ugandans, Juliana Kanyomozi, Irene Namuviru, the Bobby Wines, Baby Cool, and so on and so forth, was Yvonne Chaka Chaka. I brought her here for the first time in 1991, I think. And when she came here, all our shows were sold out. But it is then that people got to realize that actually Ugandans can do it. But before that and thereafter, Yvonne, there used to be Congolese singers coming in here. And I want to tell you that out of them, now Ugandans have done it and domesticated the music. But Kofi Olomide, Fali Pupa, Wenge Muzika, Werason have remained outstanding because they're the market leaders in terms of music. But now Nigeria and Uganda and parts of Kenya and Tanzania are starting to emerge, which shows you that the Congolese have led the show, but the Africans have perfected it in terms of the other countries.
Okay.
So Kofi Olomide is the man who is Mopao. They call him Mopao, the man.
The man.
Yes.
Okay. Here it is. And thank you again for being on the show.
You're most welcome. Thank you very much, too. It's been a pleasure. You've been a wonderful host.
Thank you.
Yes.
Willie Carlos. Video copine à terre.